Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, we're evaluating Bryce Harper's 2024 season. And folks, this one could be easier even than you think.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for joining us. You may know me for some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on 97.5 The Fanatic, talking on the radio here in Philadelphia, doing Philly sports for 5 years. This is my third season as a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member, and also my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're consuming this in podcast form. If you're watching on YouTube and are yet to subscribe, please subscribe to the YouTube. It'll get you new notifications every time a new episode is posted. It's also a great help to me here on Locked On Phillies if you do those things. So I appreciate everyone who's done that and everyone who's going to. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the season rolling with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So we're doing our 2024 player evaluations. Today, we're getting into Bryce Harper. So we're going to start with a review of his season. I'm going to grade him out. We also have something new that we're going to do grading-wise. I'll tell you about that in the first segment. We're also going to look at the future for Bryce Harper, how much it could change. We'll talk a little extension because that was a big conversation at the start of the season. And then it's also a special anniversary today, which serendipity on the timing of this. I'll tell you what that anniversary is later on in the episode. Real quick, though, this is just a little bit of me stuff here. If you have not been made aware, there's a short documentary on Netflix called The Turnaround. Now, it was made about Trey Turner's standing ovation he received in the 2023 season. I know what you're saying. Topical, current. I know, it was last year. But I've heard great reviews of the film, so you should definitely go ahead and check it out on Netflix. But also, there may be a clip or two of yours truly talking on this very podcast. So if you want to go ahead and hear my voice in a Netflix documentary, it's pretty cool. I'm very excited about that. And also, it's just a great film. So it's not just about me, but go ahead and check that out. Just a little plug there for a great piece of work by the folks who produced and created that documentary. Now, let's get into Bryce Harper. I don't need much time to do this one. And at the same time, I could talk all day about Bryce freaking Harper. This dude is the guy. He is the man. All due respect to Chase Utley. He is everything this team could have ever wanted him to be, like all the time. And I want you to do something for me because we're going to talk about some numbers real quick. And I had the benefit of looking at them, but I want you to close your eyes real quick, unless you're like operating a motor vehicle or something. I want you to think about the season Bryce Harper had. What's your immediate reaction, right? Because mine would have been, before I saw these numbers, yeah, he had an okay year. Solid year for Bryce Harper. Folks, he had more than a solid year. Like much more than a solid year. He had nearly a 5 WAR. He batted .285 with 30 home runs. Like, I don't know. I feel like this was one of the, I don't want to say less impactful years, but he was relatively healthy, even though he had to manage some stuff down the stretch. We'll talk about that. He had 42 doubles. Those 30 bombs we were talking about, 87 RBIs, which you'd like to see him be over 100, being Bryce Harper, batting third in the lineup, 157 hits in 550 at-bats. I mean, the guy was unbelievable. He created offense. He was the guy that you expect them to be. He walked 76 times, which you'd like to see that up a little bit more as well, but he was being aggressive at points in the season because he wanted to go ahead and create offense for this baseball team. When you see a guy that's going to go out there and give you 30 bombs and bat .285, like that's a top 15 player in the sport year in and year out. No doubt in my mind about that. And the other thing that elevates Bryce Harper is the moments, right? Coming up clutch for this team, doing it in the postseason, like doing it in the big moments of the regular season as you're coming down the stretch. And he had cold points of the year. He always does. I wouldn't call Bryce Harper a streaky hitter at all, but even the greats have like those down months, right? In a world of Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge, and those two guys currently playing for the World Series, or they'll begin playing for the World Series along with their teams, the Yankees and the Dodgers, tomorrow night, or Friday night. I forget what day of the week it is. Friday night. you look at a situation and you say, wow, you got a guy going 50-50. You got a guy hitting nearly 60 bombs again. There are some dudes doing amazing things in baseball. And it makes you almost forget how special Bryce Harper is when you compare him to his peers. But even by his standards, right? Yeah, this was an outstanding year for Bryce Harper. You look at what he's done homer-wise since coming to Philadelphia. Obviously, in 2021, when he had his MVP season, he went out and 2021 is MVP season. Was 2021 his MVP season? Yeah, it was. I thought so. Silver Slugger as well, by the way. I'm losing my mind a little bit. All these years blend together with all the postseason stuff to focus on. In his MVP year, he went out and he hit 35 bombs and he batted, let me get the average up here. Why is it not showing up? There it is. And he batted 309. So, that's the mark. And I don't think that would have been, I know that would not have been good enough to win MVP this year over Shohei Ohtani in the National League. But he hit 30 bombs and batted 285 this year. That's not like a lifetime away from those numbers. It's impressive what he's able to do. And something we haven't even brought up to this point yet. We talked about his hitting. We talked about his clutchness. The dude's a Gold Glove finalist at first base in his first full year playing the position. Is there anything this guy can't do? Is there any moment too big for Bryce Harper? Is there anything where you see him get an opportunity on a baseball field, whether it's fielding it, throwing it, hitting it, running the bases, where you're, okay, maybe running the bases, but where you're like, I don't have full faith in Bryce Harper right here? He is the catalyst for this team. He is the reason they've been so successful. He is the guy that leads on the field, and he had an outstanding season in 2024. Now, are there some things you'd like to see, like more consistency, more consistent power, health? Absolutely. And health is going to be a big part of our conversation on what does the future hold for Bryce Harper. But what does the past hold? At least in the past baseball season, he was really, really darn good. I don't have any knocks, honestly, based on the numbers for Bryce Harper at all. It's just he wasn't quite as healthy as you'd like him to be. And we'd like him to be perfectly healthy, and that may not be realistic for him now that he's playing another position and not DHing again. It's just more wear and tear on his body. Hopefully he gets right in the offseason. But he's got a violent swing. He's always going to have those little bumps and bruises and aches and pains. It's just playing baseball for a long time. I would like to see the base running improve, I guess. I don't know. He's a great base runner. He's just a super aggressive base runner, and people get really annoyed when he tries to swipe an extra bag, turn a single into a double, gets hosed. I mean, then there's moments where he'll see a ball down that other guys wouldn't run on, and he'll go first to third. He'll score from first on a ball in the gap with less than 2 outs because, well, he'll read it down. He has great instinct for what he can get away with, and that's just something you have to live with Bryce Harper. It's kind of like his swing, right? He's going to strike out sometimes. This year, strikeout numbers for Bryce Harper, he had 138. Would you like to see him get those down? That is the most that he's had in a Phillies uniform since 2019, his first year with the team after signing in free agency. So the strikeout numbers need to come down. That's probably the biggest knock on his season. But when he bombs one 500 feet into the South Philadelphia night, you say, okay, well, we'll take the aggressive swings if it's going to produce moments like that. It's give and take of Bryce Harper, but he is an elite level baseball player. He is one of the faces of the game. He is an absolute monster, and he's always ready for the moment. Now, we had a comment on Twitter by Tim Othie, which I love, from the Key and Peele sketch, I believe is why he uses that name on Twitter. But he said, in commentary to the JT Remuto episode, because I was talking about comparing JT to his peers and how he's still like a significantly better catcher than basically everybody in baseball. There are a handful of guys that are up there with him now, but by his standards, he had him down here. So Timothy wanted a grade for not just the player, but compared to their peers. So we'll do that for Bryce Harper. Again, batted 285, 30 bombs, was an all-star starter at first base for the National League, fully deserving of it, a Gold Glove finalist. He's a guy that is just, every single year, it pays off to have Bryce Harper on your baseball team. I can say nothing but great things about him. And I wanted to give him like a B+, just off gut feeling when I was getting ready for this episode. I'm going to give him an A-. It's an A- season for Bryce Harper. Compared to his peers at first base, it's an A+ season. You can make an argument that he was the best first baseman in baseball this year. You can make an argument. That's an A+ season. Like, he's unbelievable. He was the best first baseman in the National League. That's why he was his all-star starter. That's why he had a good second half. Well, not as good of a second half, and he had the injuries to deal with. But he was just absolutely amazing again this year. An A- for Bryce Harper, an A+ compared to his peers, and just so many moments again this season make you say, where would this team be without this guy who leads the way for them pretty much day in and day out? Well, that's not a conversation for next year, but we do have to have a conversation about what the future holds for Bryce so that this team doesn't have to be without him as much due to injury. So could there be things changing as far as a position? Would that be smart? Does he need to change an approach at the plate? Does he just need to stay the same guy? It's an interesting conversation about one of the great players in the game right now, and we will discuss that coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But I got to tell you about FanDuel first. Bryce Harper, never a bad bet. Neither is betting with FanDuel. I mean, they're amazing. They're America's #1 sports book, and sometimes it takes you to the middle of the game to figure stuff out. Like tonight, the Sixers are going to be playing. The NBA is back, and we've got our first contest for the hardwood Philadelphia team, and you might be looking at, okay, well, Embiid's out and George is out. What is Maxey going to do tonight? Not a bad idea. But if you want to wait until the middle of the game to kind of get a feel for it, or early on in the game, you're betting live, you might get a hunch in the middle, right? You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets with FanDuel. Plus, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So what are you waiting for? Go ahead and use America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com. So what does the future hold for Bryce Harper? There have been some people bringing up the injuries and also talking about how things work. This is perfect because we talked about JT Realmuto yesterday. Maybe JT Realmuto, a position change would help him. But if you move him to first base, where does Bryce Harper go? Because he can't go to DH because Kyle Schwarber can't play the field, right? So could Harper go back to the outfield? I don't know that putting Bryce Harper back in the outfield would help his long-term health, right? More running, or moving around, crashing into the wall and stuff like that. First base is a low impact position on the body, or lower, I would say, than the outfield, because you're just not running as much. You're not throwing as much. You're not doing as much. It's probably the least athletic intensive of all of the positions on a baseball field, not named pitcher, right? And that's all due respect to first baseman out there. I'm not saying first basemen aren't athletes. I would never say that because I'm a pitcher and they'd say that back to me. But bottom line is first base is probably the safest position outside of DH for him. Now, Kyle Schwarber, when he finishes up his contract, you may look to re-sign him. We'll do Kyle Schwarber's evaluation later on when we get to the DH position after we get through all the position players. But if you don't re-sign Kyle Schwarber, Bryce Harper is absolutely going to go back to DH. The tough thing is, how do you move a guy that's like a Gold Glover at first base or a Gold Glove caliber fielder at first base? I don't think he can. So first base is going to be Bryce Harper's position for the foreseeable future. I don't see them moving that around to move JT Realmuto. I don't see them moving that around because Bryce Harper's getting healthier and he's further away from that Tommy John surgery he had last year. Like, I don't see it, folks. So when you look at what Bryce Harper is, he is the guy at first base for this team for, again, the foreseeable future. So what else does the future hold for Bryce? Let's have a little talk about that extension he wanted at the start of the season, because while that conversation kind of died down in season, as we knew it would, he wants to focus on baseball, and that's the right way to handle it. I do think that he could still now say, hey, look at my numbers from this year. Look at my WAR, all-star starter, first base. I'm the man for you guys. Go ahead and give me my extension. Certainly possible that he could continue those talks. Him and his agent, Scott Boras, could this offseason with Dave Dombrowski and the Philadelphia Phillies front office. Would I give it to him? I still stand in the same place that I did last offseason when we talked about it. Absolutely, I'd do it for him. It's not ideal for the organization. Like, why would you? But why wouldn't you? He has carte blanche with this organization to say, hey, whatever I need, you guys better provide it, because I have brought back baseball to Philadelphia. And they say, damn, you know what, Bryce? You're right. Okay. What are you looking for? Now, it's not, I know I said carte blanche, which literally blank check, but when you look at, it's not a blank check as far as the dollar amount, but if he wants an extension, you go and give it to him. I'm sorry, but I don't have any issue with Bryce Harper asking, and I wouldn't have any issue with the Philadelphia Phillies giving that. If they do that, it's something that'll add on to the end of his contract, and we won't have to worry about it for like a decade still, or like 8-9 years still. So there's still a lot of time of Bryce Harper in a Philadelphia Phillies uniform before we have to worry about extending him or anything like that. But if he does come to the table and ask for it again, I can't blame him, and I wouldn't blame the Philadelphia Phillies for getting it done. So that's the contract situation. But if there's one thing I believe about this team and about stuff players on this team have said, Bryce Harper saying that this is his home and he never wants to play another game for another organization has always rang true to me. I've never not believed him when he says that. So when he wants an extension, it's not holding the organization hostage. It's not getting greedy. It's, hey, I want to be here for a long time, and I can feel myself playing longer than what the contract signed for. So let's get this done now so I don't have to worry about it then, so we don't have to go through all that trouble. And he probably does want to make a little bit more money on it than signing a contract at 38 years old or whatever he's going to be. But bottom line is, he wants to be here, and he's going to be here, and he will retire a Philly, and he will go into the Hall of Fame as a Philadelphia Philly. I mean, this dude is just – are there any doubts that Bryce Harper is a lock Hall of Famer? Probably going to end up being first ballot with all the numbers that he's going to compile with his time here in Philadelphia? No. So when you have a lock Hall of Famer and probably a lock first ballot Hall of Famer, you give the guy what he wants. I don't think people realize how rare it is. When you talk about, why does Bryce Harper deserve that extension? Why doesn't he just play on his contract and we'll worry about that later? I think you realize how much power a guy that's that amazing of a baseball player should hold over an organization. Sorry, but like, he's the most important person inside and out of this Philadelphia Phillies organization. More important than the GM, more important than the manager, more important than any other player. It is Bryce Harper's team. The one other thing we have to talk about when it comes to the future of Bryce Harper is injuries. And this is going to be similar to the JT Realmuto conversation. How do you mitigate the wear and tear injuries that come from coming up as a catcher, and then all the stuff that's happened to him at the major league level, and then these aches and pains and bumps and bruises that keep happening to him that cost him like a couple weeks of every season? Like, how do you handle that if you were the Philadelphia Phillies? It's definitely a tough question, because unlike JT Realmuto, where he's playing a physically intensive position, and you say, well, we could always play him less, Bryce Harper is playing first base. Like, it's not really a position where you need a lot of days off from, or in theory, you need a lot of days off from, and you don't have a definitive backup. What are you going to have? Cody Clemens play first base 60 games, and Bryce Harper's only going to play 102 or whatever? No, that's not realistic. So managing the type of player he is tougher in this spot. You know how in yesterday's episode, if you didn't hear it, I said JT Realmuto, one of the biggest things he can do this offseason to work on is his mentality around playing every game. He wants to be out there. He might have to swallow his pride and say, I've got to play less. It's what's best for the team, and it's what's best for me as far as production. Bryce Harper might have to do a similar thing while staying on the field. I don't want to change Bryce Harper's swing, right? I don't want to change it at all. And I don't totally want to change his approach at the plate. People might say, well, Bryce Harper, he's part of that home run or nothing approach. And that's not true. He batted 285. But you might say that and not realize for other players that's a problem. But for a guy like Bryce Harper, you want him to have that kind of approach at the plate. So I don't want to change that so much. And he's hit for average in the past and power, and is just a crazy good athlete and incredibly strong and in great shape. There's never a question about the type of shape he's in. So what do you change? That's kind of the answer. There's nothing you really can change about the way Bryce Harper plays baseball right now. If he gets banged up, he gets banged up. And he's going to do everything he can to take care of his body. And I don't know specifically what was going on with the elbow and the wrist and everything that was bothering him at the end of the year, because we never got a full report on it. Maybe it'll come out as the offseason progresses that he got some surgery done or got some work done, maybe just like a scope of that stuff to clean everything up in there. I don't know. Obviously, it wasn't serious enough to keep him out of games and keep him from being productive. He was productive even in the postseason. But that'll be something that you kind of just have to live with for the time being, because he's still so good. You can't do what you're doing with JT Realmuto, where it's like, okay, we have to manage the slide, the downside of your career. I don't think Bryce Harper's on the backside of his career. I don't. I think he could have another MVP in him. I think he could have more all-star seasons in him. I think he could be this type of player for another 3 to 4 to maybe even 5 years. with the way that he takes care of himself and the type of production he creates seemingly effortlessly. So not only has Bryce Harper been amazing, but he has shown no signs of slowing down. And I don't believe he's getting any closer. Well, he's getting closer every day because that's how Father Time works. But he's not getting like visibly closer to me of a regression or a downslope or Father Time getting to him. So for now, it's just keep doing what you're doing, Bryce. And we'll deal with the injuries if they happen and do your best to like not take unnecessary risks where you can, like diving into a camera roll in Cleveland like we saw last season, or all these like crazy hard slides and taking all these extra bases. Like maybe ease up a little bit, but you can't even ask him to do that because he's so aggressive. You just got to let Bryce go be Bryce. And it's helped the Phillies out pretty darn well so far in his tenure here in Philadelphia. This is, like I told you, the easiest evaluation that I could do because Bryce Harper, to me, is the greatest Philadelphia Philly that I've ever seen. Now, remember, I was born in 1994. So anyone before that, go ahead and you can have Mike Schmidt. You could have all those guys back in the day. Like, you want to say they're better, you could make the argument. I didn't watch them play in real time. But for me, in my lifetime, there has been no Philly greater than Bryce Harper. And it's amazing that he's continuing to produce the way that he is. Coming up next, we're going to relive, speaking of Bryce Harper producing in big spots and great Phillies moments, well, we're going to relive a very, very special one that was 2 years ago today. I'll tell you what it is next as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. First, let's talk about Prize Picks, though. Bryce Harper, I told you he'd be a good bet. I mean, he's a good guy to use in Prize Picks and take more than, but he's not playing right now. So what can you do on Prize Picks? Well, let me tell you about it first. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. They make it so easy. You just pick more or less on at least 2 to 4 or 2 players is the least you have to do, but you can do 4, you can do 6, and they're selected stats, and you have a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. So Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, probably yours, but it includes California, Florida, Georgia, Texas, and so many more. Prize Picks is also the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets hurt. That's perfect for football season. It doesn't happen as much in baseball, but football, basketball, hockey, the more physically intensive sports there, the more contact sports, it's great for that. Prize Picks has a bunch of stuff that makes sure your experience is the best. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. So let's wrap up with this because I did not totally plan this out. I wouldn't even say I kind of planned this out because I found out today, this morning, and I had already told you Bryce Harper was going to be the next guy we evaluate. It's actually the anniversary of Bedlam at the Bank. Bryce Harper's go-ahead home run in the final game of the 2022 NLCS against the San Diego Padres. I'll never forget where I was that day. I think every Phillies fan will never forget where they were that day. I was at City Tap, and I was there standing on a bar stool, getting yelled at by security, screaming at the top of my lungs because Bryce Harper just spit on the nastiest changeup and then took a ball deep the opposite way that put the Philadelphia Phillies into the World Series. It was flat out amazing. It's one of the greatest moments in Philadelphia sports that I've ever seen. It is the biggest home run I've seen in Philadelphia Phillies history. It was just absolute, pure what Bryce Harper is. A great at bat, ready for the moment. The bright lights don't faze him. He comes through more often than not. And now, since that moment, it's crazy to think about where that team was and where we are now. Bryce Harper's still the same guy. Absolutely. But that team had guys like Gene Segura on it and Matt Vierling and Kyle Schwarber was playing left field. And honestly, you look at some of the players on that team and you say, well, they're much, much better now. They're in a much better spot. They've continued to build even since that moment, but that was a magical run. And then they went back and were in the league championship series the year after, and then they won the division the next year. And I know you have the postseason collapses, but This is one of those how lucky have we been moments to have Bryce Harper here. How amazing has it been that Bryce Harper has had the moments he did on this team? Like, you're always going to think of Bedlam at the Bank. But that's what's so special about getting into the postseason, because it creates the opportunity for those moments. You realize and of course, Bryce Harper has a long time still here at Philadelphia. There are going to be other postseason moments. He's going to continue to be great. But if he didn't have postseason moments, what's the biggest moment in Bryce Harper's career as a Philly, right? Probably the walk-off grand slam against the Chicago Cubs back in what year? Probably, what was that, 2019? Like, that was a crazy moment. That was awesome. That was one of the biggest swings I've ever seen in a regular season game that absolutely didn't matter. But the playoffs are just this higher stage for guys like Bryce Harper. And for so long, for a decade, we didn't have a guy like that in the city. We used to have Jimmy and Chase and Ryan and Cole Hamels and guys that would rise to the occasion in the biggest moments. And then we went through a drought where we did not have those guys, and we couldn't make it to the postseason to find out if anyone was that guy. And none of them were quite to the level of Bryce Harper. And that was I think it was the singular moment, right? I know they didn't win the World Series, but that home run to send them to the World Series and the way it happened and the dramatics of it, I think that was from that moment forward. You reach a point on a contract, right? Ideally, where you've reached your returns. I guess we're going to compare this to economics a little bit, to business. Probably a better way to put that. But let's say you invested like $100,000 in something. You want to make a certain level of profit. You go in imagining, here's what my return on investment is going to be. When I hit this point, that's when I consider myself to be in the positive, that I've made a good investment. And then everything on top of that is gravy. Now, you want to make as much money as possible, and you want to win as many games as possible and championships when we look at it on the baseball side. But that, to me, Bedlam at the Bank 2 years ago, this day, will always be the moment where Bryce Harper's contract reached that point of it was worth it, right? Before that, he had been amazing. He'd won an MVP here. That probably should have been it. But listen, they didn't pay for an MVP trophy. They paid for an MVP caliber player who could make this team into a World Series contender. And you only had part of the equation back in 2021. That was the seminal moment of Bryce Harper's career so far as a member of the Philadelphia Phillies. There's no debating it. It is the moment that will define this era until they get further than that and win the World Series. But it's just, that is why I have so much of this give Bryce Harper whatever he wants mentality, the guy can do no wrong mentality, because he, to me, has already paid off that contract. He has already given this city more than you could have ever imagined from him when you signed him to that monster deal. And you want a ring, right? And that's something that's right to expect from a team of this caliber. But in baseball, you can't put it on an individual. You can't put it on just Bryce Harper. It's on the team. And you should hold this team that standard of you better win a damn World Series with these teams. But it's not going to be on Bryce, right? At the end of the day, we're not going to look back at this era and say, well, Bryce couldn't get it done. Bryce Harper wasn't good enough. That will never be the conversation. And that stopped after that moment right there. So I want you to just take a second for me and think back to where you were on that day watching the Phillies knock off the San Diego Padres in a rainy, oh man, I just remember the Sir Anthony Dominguez inning before where he's throwing balls to the backstop and he just can't hold on to the ball. And I'm like, how are they still playing this game? And they give up the lead. And it's just like, man, is this really going to happen? Where were you in that moment? And how did that make you feel? And we need some of that positivity these days with the way that the season ended. I'm not telling you like that makes up for losing to the Mets. No, it's history now. So you don't have to live in the past. But for a moment, on the anniversary, as we break down Bryce Harper's 2024 season, just allow yourself to go back to that place and remember there are good times that we've had with the Philadelphia Phillies and this group of players. There are still good times in the future. I firmly believe that. But this was a very, very easy evaluation at first base. Coming up next, a little bit trickier of one on our next episode. We're going to go around the diamond. So, yep, you guessed it, second base. Bryson Stott will be the next player that we break down and evaluate as we continue to roll through the Philadelphia Phillies roster. And that's going to be a very interesting one that we'll set up for tomorrow's episode. Some good, a lot of bad, and a question about also futures for him. So the Las Vegas boys, back-to-back, Bryce Harper, a dominant season. We'll talk about Bryce's style in tomorrow's episode, but that's all for today's episode. So thank you so much for joining us. Very much appreciate it. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing wherever you consume this in podcast form, and subscribing to the YouTube like we talked about at the start of the episode. It really helps me out, so I appreciate everyone who's going to do that and everyone who already has. And I will talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.